If you'd sat me down when we were sitting in the hutch at Cricklewood, 6 o'clock on a drafty morning in November of 1986, and told me that 16 years later I'd still be sitting in the makeup chair getting the glue and the latex and the nails slapped on my face, I think I would have cried.
I look at Freddy Krueger and Jason, all those kind of things, and they're, you know, acid burns, whatever's blood and guts. We got to do something that was a little bit more creative.
The line I use most frequently these days is, no teenagers were harmed during the making of this movie. And I think that's what really set it apart.
Well, I think horror audiences are ready for anything. They're really up for any kind of innovation that makes, as long as it's grotesque as possible. It was such a unique vision by Clive Barker.
It was a great journey, and it was great fun.
I was, of course, delighted to be part of anything that has an impact. So I'm thrilled about it.
Hellraiser is a domestic drama, essentially, with wonderful and terrifying glimpses of this metaphysical world beyond. And Hellbound is more an examination of that world. You know, let's get in there and see what's up. What's it look like down there?
So those are the ones that stick around, that come out of human drama and human conflict and the dynamic of what is and what could be, and that gap in between that we all fall into.
Here it is, here are we, all these years later talking about it, so it's obviously made its mark.
The whole mythology of the Cenobites and the visceral world of Hellraiser stemmed from the unique imagination of Clive Barker, a genius in his own right, expertly skilled in all mediums, Writer and director Barker was born in Liverpool, Merseyside.
Clive's one of these people who's really interested. When I first met him, he was so interested in you and everybody he met, because as an author, he could always take a little bit of that, and he was making little bit mental notes, not in a nasty way, but he was just genuinely interested in everybody he met.
Clive Barker is wonderful. I think because he wrote it as well as directing it, that he knows what he wants. He just relates to you on an honest one-to-one basis. It's not this director, you were working for me type of attitude at all.
Clive is simply the most creative person I've ever met. He is a creative genius. When we first met him, he would be sitting there thinking of one book, talking about another, and drawing something else at the same time.
Clive was a tour de force, so I think he reinvented the game.
I think I've said this many times about Clive, and I think this just has to be reconfirmed, really. Clive is a creative genius.
If he decided to become a philosophy professor, he would have been probably one of the best the world has ever seen, I think.
It's about Clive. He's also very inspirational, you know, because to working class kids from Liverpool, and Clive, by the way, was middle class. I was working class. But to a working class kid from Liverpool who knew he was smart, but assumed he was probably going to end up to be a teacher, or at best, you know, if you can make it in rock and roll, that was the only way you thought out.
He looked like a schoolboy, very slender, a lot of hair, which I haven't got then, even then, but immediate excitement about the project, and immediately he hooks you. He's a very engaging sort of person. Whether that comes through all his writing or not, I don't know.
He's a very clever chap. He has immense breadth of knowledge about poetry, painting, and an understanding of psychology, and but full of energy. Really sort of, never got tired, and it was very stimulating, inspiring to work with him.
I just have a very good impression. I just have very good memories of being on the set. There are some things you do when you think, oh, gosh, that was a bit rough, or whatever. But there was none of that. We all had a great deal of fun, and we laughed a lot. We laughed a lot. It was lovely.
Well, it would seem he's sort of out of left field. He's a sort of, and there seems to be quite a strong sort of S&M element, gay element in what he does, and he's obviously enjoying himself.
He was like this. He was like this alien. It was amazing. It was like, and very appealing, very, like a choir boy, like a demented choir boy is like, as I think of Clive.
I seem to remember somebody saying they'd seen a picture of him eating a pizza off a slab in a mortuary, which I think probably sums him up.
I feel like he's always been the same furnace blazing away, creating these extraordinary pieces, forging new material. And in some senses, that was a golden moment, those early days of theatre, where we were all, despite having no resources, working very closely on things we were very passionate about.
First published in 1986 in the Night Visions anthology series, The Hellbound Heart was written by Barker with the intention of becoming a film. The novella would be later re-released in 1988 as a standalone title after the success of the film.
It's a horror film, unapologetically a horror film. It's a horror film, I hope, which is going to have a certain impact, simply because it deals with the same...
Frank and their search for pleasure.
Yes, really, just structurally in the script, it is, I suppose it is a love story. I suppose there's two love stories. There's Julia and her husband, and then there's Julia and whatever you'd call him.
At some point where it said Hellraiser, a love story, which I thought was lovely. But I think New World knew they couldn't tell it as a horror film if it had that little bit on the end.
Hellraiser is about, it's a love story, about obsessive love, dark love. So, if an audience gets that it's kind of a bonus.
And when you hear the word love, you think romance, right? What goes on between Julie and Frank is sexual obsession.
So you've got, again, this central element of Hellraiser is this love story between a woman and a man with no skin.
I've always thought it's like a sort of kind of a bit of a tragic sort of love triangle, really, that you've got these three characters that, all of their sort of attentions are kind of drawn in different directions.
This unfrequented love, and about the fact that this box then creates this machine, this whole world, and emerges.
What can I say? It was a bizarre situation. I mean, it was all sort of, flirty, and both thinking, well, shagging really.
It's about taking your desires to its logical conclusion. In the case of Frank, that restless hunger, that greed for experience.
With their partnership now firmly formed, Figg and Barker would set out to attract interest in their novella, The Hellbound Heart. After expanding into film production with notable successes in the early 1980s, British entrepreneur Richard Branson's Virgin Films consequently would announce in 1983 that they would be investing £14 million in a series of movies. By 1986, Virgin Films developed an interest in Hellraiser with the prospect of developing it into a feature film.
I was introduced to Clive by a mutual friend, and he said, I want to make a film. And I said, well, I want to produce a film. And he said, I want to make a horror film. I said, well, fine, that's popular genre at the moment, and we're talking 1986. And we decided, okay, cheap, 3 people in a house, and we'll go from there. The putting together of the financing, I hadn't got a clue. The thing about being a producer is you're jack of all trades and master of none. And anyone can be a producer, you just have to have a script under your arm. But what I did was I thought, right, okay, who's financing stuff? And at that time, Virgin were making films, Virgin Films. So we started with them, and they said yes.
I think Virgin backed out because they didn't think it sat with its images as a family entertainment. Clive and Chris took themselves off to LA and
Los Angeles, and went to see New World because they had a track record in this type of genre. And they said, maybe we'll come and see you. Then we had this extraordinary tea in the Ritz where the chap from New World, a guy called David Saunders, asked us to come and have tea in the Ritz with him. And of course, neither of us had a tie at the time. When you had to have a tie to have tea in the Ritz. So he scrabbled around and bought a tie in Berwick Street or something and went down the Ritz, had tea with David Saunders where he said, we don't want to do this. And Clive and I said, you're mad, you can't lose on it. Anyway, we turned them around during tea. And they teamed up with Virgin, and then just as we were closing the financing, Virgin Films suddenly stopped doing it. And we managed to persuade New World to take on the whole budget, which was about £900,000 then. And we then went off and made it for that.
I think probably Virgin regretted losing the film, to be honest with you.
Boasting a cast of newcomers, Hollywood stars, classically trained British theatre actors, and friends of director Clive Barker, the characters that were first created in the novella, The Hellbound Heart, would emerge from page to screen and become some of the most iconic characters in horror genre history.
You've got Frank there. You've then got his brother Larry, who's the complete opposite, who just wants to have a normal relationship with his wife, Julia.
So the story of these two brothers, one of whom clearly is much more charismatic and exciting, particularly to Julia. And so poor Larry is a little bit of a wet rag by comparison with the sort of tornado that Frank must be.
Larry is this pathetic, downtrodden, under-the-thumb milksop weed. And what Andy does is he plays Larry so far down here that when he's playing Frank in Larry's skin at the end, he's got everywhere to go to ramp it up, come to daddy, all of that stuff, is fantastic.
New World wanted us to have an American in there, so we ended up with Andy Robinson, who was great, really good fun, really, and because he'd been such a good villain in Dirty Harry, you know, it sort of brought a bit of subtext to it all, and it did work very well.
I was excited that we had Scorpio from Dirty Harry coming to be in Hellraiser, because I'd seen the movie and loved it, and then knew all the lines for, you know, you feeling lucky.
It was out of his comfort zone. He had no idea what he was doing. He had no idea what was going on. And yet he embraced every moment of it and was excited.
Clive could charm birds out of a tree. And the script was so interesting and so weird. And I happen to love weirdness. So, I mean, you know, there was no question that, and going to London, where I went to school, and I could hang out and see old friends and whatever. There was nothing, there were no negatives about this job. I'm paid well. I assumed that the check would clear the bank.
Julia, his wife, is English and looks perhaps 10 years his junior. She is
bitch. Wicked stepmother, evil queen.
In the middle is Julia. Now Julia is this, in a way, she's the driving force for the story. Once Frank has been dragged away by the Cenobites, she is the hope, and it's only that she has desires strong and dark enough that allows the story to take place. So she's really the means to bring our anti-hero back into the world.
I mean, this dark, mysterious woman that he totally falls head over heels for, and who was absolutely the wrong person for him ever to get involved with. He could never satisfy her, whatever her needs were, could never satisfy her.
The relationship between Frank and Julia is an extreme one. I mean, it goes into the areas of possibly being psychotic, or it's hard to talk about in real terms because it's fantasy. But yes, obviously there's something about that relationship that people do find compelling.
What lengths some women will go to for a good fuck.
How did I end up playing Julia? Well, yes, Clive, it was really very simple. Clive sent me a script of the film, and I read it. I was doing something else at the time, and I knew I was going on to do something else. And I realised I could do the film. I could do it in terms of time. But I turned it down twice initially, because, as I say, I don't watch horror. And I did think the script was pretty violent.
Clare Higgins on Hellraiser was an interesting thing because she technically is the star of it.
I think I spoke to Clive over the phone for quite a long time. And I was just sort of enchanted by him. And I thought he had such a wonderful... he has his own, well, as everybody knows, who knows Clive's work, he has a million different life forms going on inside his head. I thought he was extremely bright and very imaginative, and I liked him enormously when we spoke. And so I did it. I decided to do it.
She's wonderful. She's the best thing in it, to be honest. She's a brilliant actress. There's the shot in the mirror when she's wiping the blood off her face, and there's just a look that's in her eyes that just is just Claire. She's fabulous.
As a character, she was evil. She played it evil. You know, even on a normal line, there was something sinister behind it. She added that to it, and you couldn't stop watching her on set.
Kiss Frank.
Frank is the ultimate person who wants to experience everything. He really wants. It appears he only feels alive when he's actually physically enjoying sex, and having had sex in every permutation he can think of, he wants his flesh to experience more.
Then Frank did shag his own brother's wife in her wedding gown. I mean, that's a pretty, am I right? Yeah. It's naughty, that, isn't it?
It's bastard. A dirty bastard. as we would say in Liverpool.
The character of Frank, as played by Sean, obviously a very odd person, and with bizarre ideas about how to get a buzz out of life, entering hell and shagging for England or whatever. So one had he was a nasty piece of work.
Sean and I talked about Frank and about putting Frank together, and Sean, a really lovely man. But it's so hard because Sean and I are so different. But I really did try to take base my Frank on a lot of Sean's behavior and a sort of deliberate, sort of like low, menacing kind of thing.
I met Oliver via Robin, and obviously I'd met Oliver before, but then when I got the Hellraiser gig, because you immediately start thinking about actors, and I remember saying to my wife, Oliver would be, and we discussed it, and I said, and Oliver was, we all lived in Parsons Green, the area, and Oliver was around that area. And I remember saying to him, how about it? And of course he was very interested, and I got him into an audition, he met Clive, and he got the part. And he was fantastic in it.
Selwyn, I knew Selwyn, and he thought of me and got me along to meet Clive Barker, who I didn't know anything about the film or him. So I went up to Production Village, where I was met and interviewed by Clive Barker, who took me through the format and said, do you mind being rubberized from head to foot and playing this sort of, there's a before and after sequence of who this character, Frank, is. Sean Chapman, to begin with, looking quite pretty, and then emerging as an ugly arsehole like myself.
It takes a certain amount of courage to be naked and to be covered in slime and do this and do that.
He went through hell. We life cast him from head to toe. Everybody had a go at sticking pieces together and sculpting pieces. It's the yardage as well. When you've got a person who every single inch of them is covered in either a suit that was reusable or prosthetics up to here and here that had to be replaced every single day.
He was a lot of work, and Oliver, who was a scream, he was a living, hysterical actor. I think I hadn't met someone who was just he was just like out of another era, plonked into our world, and he was hysterical. It's like from a slightly bygone age, but very charming with it. I mean, capital C-H, charming.
Two men are attempting to move a bed into the house.
Where I was thinking maybe it would be a good idea if I'm doing this movie, it would be a good idea if people can actually see me, see my face. So that if I'm going to auditions down the line, I can mention to casting directors that I was that guy in that film, and there'd be a recognition factor. I think that might have been a wrong choice.
He could have done both because no one would have recognised him as, because a pinhead and a removable man don't appear in the same scene.
I don't know really. I wasn't that involved with that moment in terms of Clive was clearly keen to offer us something, and I was very happy to leave it to his discretion. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't done The Workman. Of course, The Workman has become a historic character, and people remember the film mainly for the removal man, so of course I haven't looked back.
Honestly, I don't think it was. I mean, it was no more than 5 minutes of idle thought. I don't think there was ever any doubt in my head that this guy with the pins was a bit more interesting than the mattress delivery guy. So it was certainly always, I think, Clive's intention that I would play Pinhead. It was certainly always mine.
The leader of this quartet has pins driven into his head at inch intervals.
They are ageless experts in the art of refined pleasure and even more refined pain.
The thing I want to say about Pinhead, and it's been backed up when they tried it another way, which is Pinhead is 99% Doug and 1% us. what we do.
Doug's voice is then the sort of like the icing on the cake because he has a beautiful voice. It's a lovely classical English fluid voice that really comes out. And I think that's where the character was really born, where Doug really discovered that role, was by when he spoke the lines.
Best friend, worst nightmare. Because I owe so much to having played this part, but the actual experience, physical experience of being put in sensory deprivation was fairly tough. But yeah, so best friend, worst nightmare.
I think the scariest character in Hellraiser, there was something totally disturbing about those constantly chattering teeth and those blind eyes and this, hands going into Kirsty's mouth, and it's just, ugh.
When we first discussed the Chatterer, he basically described him as the family dog. That you had Pinhead, who was definitely the lead Cenobite. You had the female Cenobite. You had Butterball, who was kind of the surgeon. And then Chatterer was going to be the kind of literally the leapy around dog who would attack people. The original idea was that I would be crouching down and be very much a monkey creature in the way that, part of the chattering thing is that the monkeys chatter their teeth, or chimpanzees particularly chatter their teeth. I think this is what he was thinking about.
Nick and I had known each other for 3 years at drama school. Then there was a 2-year break before we got together on Hellraiser. My memories of Nick on set were, you get up at 3, the car would come, you get into a car, you get to set and you'd sit in the makeup chair, and the poor makeup artists had probably been up half the night anyway, and so there was this lovely quiet period on set where everybody would just sit there being kind of slightly zen as everybody got on with their makeup. And then Nick would come in. Good morning, everybody! Hi, how are you? Nice to see you! And we go, oh no, Nick, no, it's 5 a.m. Anyway, what's it doing? It's good. No, Nick, please be quiet, please. That was my memory. That was what was going through my head. Because he was so jolly at 5 a.m. And everybody else was like, oh, 5 a.m.
A fat, sweating monster whose eyes are covered by dark glasses.
Simon Simon's a sort of smallish, quieter person. I think we're sort of slightly awestruck by the whole thing.
A thin guy in a fat man's body. A thin, short guy in a fat man's body.
I rang Clive after a couple of years to see what he was up to, and he said, I've just done... Oh, sorry, nice to speak to you. I've just done these couple of films, and they weren't very good, but I've persuaded them to let me direct the next one. He doesn't have this accent at all, but I can't do Liverpool. Would you like a part? Would you like to play a monster in the next film? I went, yeah. Thinking, it's probably a ton of tiny, filmed on a Super 8 camera. He said, yeah. I said, yeah, that'd be good, Clive, thank you. I really didn't think it was going to be like a big budget film or reasonable budget film. And he said, yeah, do you want to play a monster for me? I went, yeah. He said, there might be a little bit of makeup. Yeah, it's fine.
I think Simon, he was double booked. He was doing a play. I'm not sure if he was actually performing or doing rehearsals that day. But yeah, they needed someone to step in. So I got talked into it. I didn't want to do it. I got talked for about a day. Yeah, and got talked into it. And the following day, bald cap, face blacked out, put the suit on. And then I was coached by Jane Wildgoose, the costume designer, on how to sort of act in the costume. So I had the head to go on as well, the mask, glasses on top of that, and then I was kind of shuffled onto the stage and just sort of directed for a few shots.
A woman whose neck is pinned open like a vivisection specimen.
Grace was there, but didn't really appear to want to be there most of the time. She came in, did her lines very beautifully, I thought.
And I remember the first time the makeup went on, it really upset her to look into the mirror and see the face that she'd seen looking back all her life be so different. And I think the other thing that got to her was just how intimidated everybody else was by her. It wasn't the makeup effects crew. The makeup effects crew would see her go in and knew who she was and would treat her the same. But other people on the crew, I think it was a fairly hard process for her to go to. And that's quite normal. I mean, female actresses often find when you turn them into hideous monsters that this is not what they're used to. This is not what they're used to looking at.
The costumes were solid leather, very heavy solid leather, and I don't think she enjoyed wearing the costumes, which is why she didn't come back for the second film. But she came in and did a beautiful job, and I thought the look in her eyes, and again with Little John's makeup on the film, she was perfect.
Wearing prosthetic makeup is torturous at the best of times, and at the end of the day we would laugh and joke, and even when it was late into the night, taking the makeup off in the last hour of the day when everyone else has long gone home, the prosthetic makeup artists are still taking off makeup.
Interdimensional creatures or demons, the Cenobites would attract the attention of filmgoers across the world. Before Hellraiser, demons in films were presented as large horned creatures or evil entities. However, Barker's creations were developed through fantastical costumes and amazing special makeup effects.
We've gone out of our way, Bob Keane's team and myself have gone out of the way to design monsters which are not going to really resemble anything that would have been seen before. That's my hope anyway.
Bob Keane used to take a group of us over to Clive's flat in Crouch Inn a couple of times a month, if I remember. And we'd go over and literally try and come up with ideas for Cenobites. The only ones that Clive had really realised was what became known as Pinhead.
The average day at first was the drawings and the designs. So we're doing drawings of Cenobites and doing all this research into material that was, it was horrific and shocking at the time. I mean, people weren't pierced in those days, and so looking at pictures of all these different piercings was really quite shocking.
I'd seen one drawing of Pinhead, and that's all I knew, and it was a man with some scars and some spikes sticking out of his head.
I've got a drawing that I did of Pinhead. So there was this drawing that that Clive did, which when you see it, you're just like, oh, so we literally did make that. And there's I think there's an elegance and there's a beauty to it that came, that got added into Clive's drawing. And so you could argue, that it was Clive's completely design. But there was a time when we were actually exploring other things, and I did this one that was really, because that's what I was into, was a very ethnic looking Pinhead, and so he wasn't quite. It wasn't about symmetry and fine pins. It was a lot about piercings and scarification, and gosh, I haven't seen the picture for a long time.
I had seen a design for the makeup, so I had a vague idea of what it was going to look like. There were actually two designs, I think. One was a much looser, more tribal thing with more piercings and more kind of African-inspired in a way. But I think Clive was always coming back to this precise, neat, controlled gridiron look.
So there was the design stage where we were just doing designs and then taking them along to Clive, and that was a really great collaborative process where we're just kicking around designs with him. It was such a fertile soil of creativity because he was so magnanimous with his genius, because to me he was a genius, and then once we got to look understand what the designs were, somehow it got allocated. Because I was young on the team, I wouldn't have known how they decided that, but I did a drawing of the female Cenobite in its early stages, which had a spike to its cheek, and Clive made some suggestions about bringing the spike down and and I'd done a wound on the neck and opening up that wound in a very vaginal-like manner.
The first time we were led onto the set, the crew didn't know that Nick and I were blind. So we were led onto the set, and the first assistant director came up and said, we could only just hear, I could only just hear, saying, okay, we need you to, we're going to get you to go over here and turn there, move over here, pick that up, I don't know if it was pick that up, but turn over here, do that, move there, and I was going, and Nick was going, and they're going, what? No, okay, so you got that? And the next thing we knew, there was action. And we were like, what?
One of the changes that was made to the Chatterer makeup was that in the original makeup he had short pointed teeth, as if they'd been filed down. And they were made and they were tested. But Clive thought that they made him too inhuman. And actually you really needed to see the fact that he was a human.
I think one of the main stipulations when I was designing Pinhead is that Clive said he wanted Doug to be there. He wanted to see Doug through the character. So consequently the makeup is barely 2-3 mil thick at the best, and he wanted to keep Doug's face in there.
I've always said that the wearing the makeup for me was fine as long as you were working. It's the killing time that's the issue. You know, and everybody knows that in makeup or out of makeup, the average day on a film set is 10% working and 90% waiting. And that's hard enough at the best of times, but you're carrying that makeup around all day. And with the first two movies, the costume was not easy to take off either, so the costume tended to stay on as well. You want to be able to just lift that off and put it down and be yourself for a while.
Head is so called because they were originally pins. So when we designed, I took Clive's original drawing, which say had like little spikes sticking out, very more tribal. I changed that to pins, and we'd thought about various different options, and Clive liked the pins. It was very subtle, very thin.
So the next step in the process for me was going to Cricklewood to screen test the makeup. So that was the first time I had the makeup applied, and then it took about 6 hours, I think, to put the whole thing on, and it's a strange experience first time you go through it. I think I was kind of zoned out, having kind of mystic experience by the end of it. Not at all inappropriate for playing a part like Pinhead.
So we got to the point where shooting was going to start, and they took some test photographs, a lot of which are still banding around now in some of the books. Very blue tinged photographs against a rather tatty looking wallpaper that I think was shot at Production Village on the set. And you couldn't see the pins. And that was it. So we thought, bugger. And Clive said, and I didn't say, I hope I'm not an I told you so person, but the thing is, I said, look, you know, you can't see the pins, so we all agreed. So we said, we've got to go bigger. So we turned them into nails. So we came up with the idea, we found some brass rod. There's a company called K&S, I think, that makes architectural model maker supplies, and they do a hollow brass rod. So we cut inch lengths of hollow brass rod, about 2 or 3 mil thick, and we then cut off the tops of lots of brass nails and superglued them to the tops of those rods. All we then had to do was snip the tiny little pinheads off the pins and simply insert the rods over the top of the pins, which actually made it much, much easier, because at the end of the day, all you do is you take Doug into the makeup room. You would then simply pull the nails off the pins, because they were simply sitting there. They fit, shall we say, comfortably tightly, but not so tightly as you couldn't simply pull them off. They wouldn't drop off. But you pulled them off, took the makeup off, pulled the pins out the back, and then the next day you would push the pin through, put the new nail over the top. And that was it. So he was never called Nailhead, he just remained as Pinhead.
You look in the mirror and you've disappeared. You're not there anymore, which is unsettling. I could see my ears and my mouth and my eyes. That was it. And I sat on my own in front of the mirror for 15, 20 minutes maybe. Just starting to get to know this guy and just staring, and then starting to see what happened if I raised an eyebrow or if I frowned, and now if I try saying something like, "No tears, please, it's a waste of good suffering," what does this look like? Okay, all right. And becoming very excited. That was the first time that the whole thing really caught fire for me.
With both the skills of problem solver Bob Keane and special effects wizard Jeff Potas, Image Animation was formed in Shepperton Studios.
I think with Image Animation, I think we'd come up with the name before Hellraiser when we got the small shed in Shepperton, which was only about 3 or 4 months beforehand. So we'd finished Highlander, moved to Shepperton. We'd set up a small company in a shed, done a couple of small jobs. It was a few little props, bits and pieces for, I think, a couple of small films, and a couple of big films, but subcontracted work.
What we wanted to do is create a company that would have new blood. Right? We'd worked for a lot of people who'd been in the industry for a long time, and we felt that the industry really needed an injection of new ideas. So a lot of the time we would tackle jobs together, and we would both supervise. I think Jeff is a really good makeup artist and works out really well at those things, and I'm really good special effects person who can solve problems.
There were about 10 of us. I think we had about 3 or 4 months before filming started to actually sort of build the stuff, which is a reasonable length of time for the amount of work we had to do. But it got on. We organised the place, we got stuff found out, we found out what we had to do, and just took it from there.
The way I ended up working on Hellraiser is that, very simply, that neither Bob nor Jeff knew how to drive a vehicle. And so, as they were trying to run a business and actually trying to run a film, they had no one to drive the van. And as I was working in a college at the time, and it was my summer holidays, they said, "Can you pop in for a couple of weeks and drive a van while we set up a film?" And 3.5 years later, I was still there.
So I was working down the market in Covent Garden and Camden Lock. I'd been to art college, and after that I started sculpting little hobgoblins, which were based on leprechauns and pukas, and they were sold in little jars. And I'd been doing it for about a month, and one day this guy came along and really liked what I was doing and said he was putting a team together for a film. That was Bob Keane, and I think he said the film was due to start in about 3 months' time. So we had a couple of meetings. He definitely wanted me on board, and that was it. It was just meetings around his flat, and a very small team of people, and of course every 2 months to get another phone call saying the film's gone back again. So it was about 6 months before we actually started doing anything.
So this was my first feature film. So I'd done a commercial, but this is my first feature film. I didn't know how things worked. I was literally coming in not knowing how. I didn't even actually know how prosthetic makeup was made or done. I was going to learn all that through the production of the film.
It's like a little, it was like a youth club for makeup effects,
I think the liaison between costume and makeup was obviously vital. And mercifully, we all got on like a house on fire. As I say, I'm still in touch with Roy and Jeff, the makeup guys, after nearly 30 years. So we must have had a good time. The other thing I remember about Roy and Jeff, they seem to have this plethora of pretty young boys working makeup. All just waiting to be cougarised. I hasten to add, I was only 28 at the time, but in comparison, so that was good fun, getting to know their entire makeup crew over the period of time, one by one.
I remember it was something that you'd be loath to ask in the workshop, to have to go and get condoms and KY jelly, because condoms were made out of latex, which was the bread and butter of prosthetics in those days, and sheet latex was something that you just constantly need. And KY jelly was used to make something appear wet under the lights of the cameras stay constantly wet. And it was great because you could have a little drip, like there's a little drip on Frank's chin, a little bit of KY jelly, and it would just stay there for hours and he'd move and it would wiggle about. The nature of KY jelly was such that it was just perfect for our uses. But God, was it embarrassing to have to go into a supermarket and have to buy boxes and boxes of condoms and KY jelly.
I can remember horrified walking into a chemist and saying, I'd like to buy every condom you have. And the man looking at me very straight-laced, looked at me and said, are you going to a party? And I thought, am I going to say, no, I'm going to wash them, cut them up and stick them on someone's face? Or, no, I'm going to a party. I said, I'm going.
On the blood-splattered floor, a box some 6 inches square.
You have to negotiate your way through that, and you meet Pinhead, and he's not straight into you with the hooks and chains and tearing the soul apart. He wants to stop and have a good conversation about you and who you are and what makes you tick and what your dreams are. You know,
it seemed a bit boring to just say, okay, it's a Chinese puzzle box. Let's go and get some Chinese symbols. It would look like a tattoo, basically. So just played around, and it was always supposed to be made by this French puzzle box maker, but we put him in a certain time, say the 1750s or whatever. Then France had an empire, and that empire went to China, and that empire went to Arabia and North Africa, and so you can then start looking at the symbols of those places and also old languages.
It was the box. It was a box. It was a puzzle box. You opened the puzzle box, it took you to hell. That all grew up, or maybe Clive had it. He just didn't need to tell it to us. But it was, you know, or maybe he told it to Simon. I don't know. But you know, it was something I needed to know at the time. And I think also that there's a great deal of. We didn't know we didn't know this was going to be a huge, successful film.
There are things hidden away in it, yeah. There's lots of symbols which try and explain what will happen if you open the box or how to open the box, but you've got to know what you're looking at. And there's a strange symbolism which shows Larry's face or a face pulled apart, but you've got to know where to look on the box. And I was showing someone last night, there's what looks like could be a very beautiful woman with a hook going through her eye. But again, you've got to know where it is. Once you've seen it, so even the engineer who's, once you've seen it, you can see it all the time.
So we had one box which had a little syringe in the bottom that would push, the syringe would push it up, and then a little motor inside would kick in and drive it. That would be one box, and then she'd put a finger in and then it would reverse. And then we had another box that was like a shape of a diamond cut in the wood, so it would literally lift up, turn, and then when it came down again, the corners would create a diamond effect. And then we had another box that would open up on the top, and another box that did other things. So there was probably about 8 boxes to make it do all of those little tiny tricks, to make you believe that you'd seen one box do everything.
Even this stupid puzzle box, which doesn't seem to have any use whatsoever. Boring. Who the heck can that be? Weirdo.
I was thrilled when I was on Scooby-Doo. That's probably been one of the highlights. I should have done a royalty deal, really, because it's now produced all over the world. I get emails from all over the world saying, how did you do this? Can you give me some advice? I'd like to do some. And yeah, so it's nice, but you're not producing an icon when you're doing it. You're making a box.
The birth of Frank remains one of the most memorable.
And what is great about that scene is now 20 minutes into whatever it is into the movie, it's the first big
bump and scare in the movie. You go, oh my God, this is amazing. And you got to remember, 1987, nobody had ever seen anything like that at all.
This is where the American producers were wonderful, was a long time after the film, you know, we'd finished the film and the film moved on, we'd all gone on to do other things. They said, let's go back, let's do some pickups, let's set a small unit up, let's come up with a really great birthing sequence. And we started completely anew. We had the luxury of a raised stage so we could work underneath. We built lots and lots of puppet rigs. We had this wonderful goo pumping material which would pump up methyl cellulose by the gallon. It would all come up. And we could work through the goo because we had like rubber gusseting that would hold all the goo in still.
Originally, the Frank was bricked up behind a wall and he just falls out the wall and then he starts talking and we built a puppet, a lip-syncing puppet that just was too complicated for its own good, really. I mean, it was a fairly simple rod puppet with cable-controlled facial expressions, but it just took too many of us to coordinate it. We never really got it together.
He looked like something out of a tomb of mummies, and he was inside this wall, and he was there, the bottom half of him. So there was different animatronic ones that we made. We made one where he was sat in the room, and then there was this one where he was going to come out of the wall. I'm not quite sure how he was going to actually be, the concept of how his birth was actually started when we were doing him like that.
And then we did a lot of stuff where we were doing wax. So we'd have the finished item, and then we'd have wax heads on that, but on animatronics. And we'd have veins that were...
Little guy, in the months before Hellraiser, we did a soap commercial for a soap powder called Breeze, and it was shot at Elstree Film Studios, and it was basically Legend had just come out, and the director wanted to remake Legend as a 30-second soap commercial. So we'd use this kid as a fairy, and he was really good, and so we got him back to wear this Frank suit for that one brief scene where he crawls along the floor.
The moulding process is a pretty weird process when you cover someone's head entirely in alginate, which is what you have your teeth cast with, and then to back that up, a plaster bandages over the top. Anybody in their right mind is going to find that claustrophobic.
There were 3 stages to skin Frank the puppet. Stage 1, which was the dried sort of looking makeup, and stage 2, which is the very red makeup. Cliff Wallace did the stage 3 makeup, which was then applied on top of my makeup to save time, so it worked.
I worked with Cliff Wallace on the suit for skinned Frank. He had these ribs that were made. I remember when Bob said to me, yeah, just make them out of this bit of perspex. And I was like, huh? Yeah, cut some perspex out and then heat it into the shape that you want. And I remember thinking, this is insane, that will never look good. To me, I was like, they should be sculpted. And it was just like, yeah, no, it's a big sheet of white perspex that you had done. Don't know what you're doing there. Sorry. So I cut out these ribs and sanded them and tried to make them look a bit organic rather than this flat, shiny thing. And then made these ribs, and then I got to put them on with Cliff. I used to help him when I could in the makeup. And now looking at the photographs, the depth of his chest is... when you know what it is, it just looks ridiculous to me. But when you don't know, it kind of looks, oh, that looks interesting, how the depth that's created on this makeup of this bodysuit.
There's the final stage, which was the sort of surface anatomy stage where I think Barry Norman described it as looking like a raspberry ripple. It's the sort of bloody skin stage, and then there was the stage before that, which was the skinned. The skin suit, and went and bought the weirdest skull I could find, which was the skull of a South American tapir, and it cost me £35, and I got told off because I'd spent another £5. And then I bought 3 ibex horns, and I stuck the horns in its eye sockets, and the rest of it was just a plastic skeleton, or 2 plastic skeletons stuck together with a really long neck. And yeah, I'm still making shit out of bones, really. Nothing much has changed.
It was a funny looking, because it was like this, how are they ever going to turn that into something usable? Because on one hand, it was an interesting looking demon with its, you know, the skull and the horns and everything, and then the sheet latex with bits of veins looked a bit iffy, but you thought, oh, well, you never know. In those days, film, it wasn't like high definition film, so there was, everything looked not quite brilliant in our world to the naked eye, and we were just constantly reassuring people that the definition of film would make it all look good. And me, on my first film, I didn't know that was it, but I'd been learned like a parrot how to reassure people that was the case, and that was the case, isn't it? And so things had this lovely quality on film in those that was shot in those days.
Put together remarkably quickly, like 4 days, and then thrown in a fire for about 10 minutes and shot. So it was one of those effects that just sort of fell out of the back of the lorry and went straight onto set, and they got what they got with that. And for the way it's edited, it works. It works, but it's one of those, you know, it's not something you want to do every single day of the week. It's an effect that quick.
It was basically a couple of skeletons stuck together with some dental dam for wings, and a couple of rods out the back of it, and 3 or 4 of us wiggling it and trying to give it some semblance of life. Not very well, really.
From an alternative metal band to a classical composer, the music of Hellraiser would fast become one of the film's strongest features, complementing the horror presented on screen.
I was made aware of the fact that initially Clive's concept of the music was that it was going to be performed by a band called Coil that were friends of his, London friends. And I was not familiar with their music. I have since become familiar with it, and I must say it's stunning music. It's stunning music. At the time, it was pretty new, novel, extraordinarily novel. The industrial thing. It wasn't mainstream. Still isn't really mainstream. Never will be.
The problem with our experience was that we never got to bring the music to its full fruition. I mean, the pieces that we have, the pieces that we eventually released on the unreleased themes to Hellraiser, which is the record, were essentially demos of our intentions for the piece.
Tony arrives in London and sits down and says, I need to have a meeting. We should have a meeting with Coil, Clive, because there's certain things that a film score needs to do, which has to do with having the music being scene specific and cut specific.
So we produced all of the music electronically and via sampling, but the intention was once we produced the musical ideas that we would then take them to Clive and to the production team and say, this is what we think would be right for this section and this section and this section. If you're good with that, then we'll go the extra step and we'll bring in our regular musical collaborators, because we worked with string people on the Coil records.
I did meet with Coil out of courtesy. They, however, after I questioned them about their ability to write music for film, and I asked some pretty pointed technical questions.
Unfortunately, the project never quite reached fruition, and so we never did actually kind of end up with that blend.
The question I think he put to Coil was, hey guys, have you ever done this before? Do you understand the concept of writing the picture and the necessity to have things frame accurate? And I think they said, no, this is not our thing. We were going to do pretty much, sort of sound design stuff that would just act as a bed for the image.
They bowed out and Christian was hired.
But suffice to say, Tony had enough positive experiences with me being the head of post-production at New World, and I'd done numerous films for them back then. I became kind of the in-house guy.
It was Tony Randall that suggested Christopher Young, and Christopher Young then was just starting out. Little do we know how big he would become. But he was a joy, absolute joy. He composed it, and then we went to Munich and recorded it, and it was just a joy. It was incredibly easy. And very exciting in those days to have a full orchestra playing music to the clips of your film on a big screen. It was really very exciting.
So I think the score helped make the film become the cult classic that it's become. I'm not saying that it was a great score, I'm just saying the sonori, the fact that it's orchestra and not a synth score, I think for this picture did help.
Released on the 11th of September in 1987 in the UK and the 18th of September in the USA, Hellraiser would go on to receive mixed critical reviews, but financial success.
But now, let me put a question to you. Have you ever been to a movie, discussed it with other people, and then wondered whether you'd all seen the same picture? I've just had that kind of experience with something called Hellraiser. This is a British horror pic, written and directed by one Clive Barker, who, according to some admiring sources, has gleefully broken the rules of the genre and/or produced a genuine original. I read these comments with total bemusement because, as far as I'm concerned, Hellraiser is a nasty little film that I watched with a deep, and if not original, then certainly genuine loathing. I found the whole thing grubby and gratuitously violent, though I dare say Clive Barker and his admirers would have me believe that I missed the point and it's all supposed to be tongue-in-cheek. But that won't wash, because the film is devoid of both wit and humour. If this is gleefully breaking the rules of the genre, I could only wish that he'd left the damn rules alone, inadequate though they might have been.
I loved it from the start. I thought everything had come together brilliantly. I mean, of course, the odd thing is, especially playing a character who I think was only on screen for about 10 minutes. There was an awful lot of the movie that I'd never seen. I'd had no contact with at all. So seeing that all come together was great.
We knew it was, there'd been a good thing, but not like now. You didn't get the instant feedback. It's not like you could just log in and get a whole load of comments, this is great, this is bad, or anything like that. That simply didn't exist. The only way you got fan mail was through your agent. And that's when you got feedback.
I went to see the film with my mum, the first one, and she kind of spent the whole time like this whenever the Cenobites came on, and I was going, Mum, no, this is me. Yeah, but it's horrible. Yeah. So she never really saw. She saw the other bits, but never when we were on screen.
When I first saw the film, I think it was at the press showing, and I left halfway through because I couldn't handle it. I went and sat in the bar. And I'm not sure I've ever seen it all the way through. Really, because I do find it shocking and visceral.
I remember seeing Hellraiser in 1987 and going, oh my God, this is just a game changer.
The marketing of Hellraiser did focus on Pinhead. And I think the reason for that is because it was marketed as a horror film. So the marketing of a film is almost sort of prostituting your baby to the audiences. Actually, that's a terrible expression, but it's selling out your soul you're selling out your work for for an audience. So you can't be precious about the material when it comes to the marketing. And Pinhead is a very iconic image. You see it all sorts of places.
But what a genius marketing idea it was, because I remember, and I'd been in it, looking at that image, and everybody around at the time, they were going, what is that? It was so unique that it instantly caught your attention wherever you were. And yeah, he became iconic. Bastard.
I think it was just inevitable, because all the interest was around the Cenobites and was around Pinhead. If you were going to find a shorthand image by which people would know what Hellraiser was, it was Pinhead. If you showed them Julia, there wouldn't immediately be a connection. The character even started being referred to as the Hellraiser.
I rued the day that Doug got to be the poster boy. Why couldn't we all been the poster people? Could have been 4 of us. It would have been brilliant. Changed our careers. He was very lucky.
There were, I've still got, I think, a newspaper clipping that sort of that was written to the Evening Standard saying, sir, I've just walked past a poster that has a picture of a man with nails banged into his head, and I think this should be taken down as it could scare young children, and that kind of stuff. And it's, when you think of what was even around, 87, there was still heavy-duty stuff around.
Certainly my daughter and her friends were thrilled when Hellraiser came out. All the work that I'd done, all the Shakespeare, fuck that. You were Hellraiser? Then that gave me, sort of like cred, street cred.
A successor to Hellraiser was soon to be inevitable, with rumors of a sequel being whispered on the set before production even ended.
Hellraiser had not been released, but I guess New World, which was the American financing company, were pleased enough with it, I guess, maybe with previews and stuff, that they had authorized the sequel.
I think rumours were sort of at the end of the production phase when just about Hellraiser was coming out. I think the rumours were about that they might do a second one.
We started talking about a sequel while we were in the editing process. There was a very strong feeling that the film would be successful. And so it really started early. Development did not begin until a little bit later, but it was decided early on to do a sequel. That was an era when horror films were always generating sequels, and New World wanted their Nightmare on Elm Street, basically. And that's why it was greenlit early. At least the development of it was greenlit.
I think when we knew that we were going to go with the second film, I and Clive sort of put the word out to the key individuals, hoping that they would be available for us, and they were. So that was really as simple as that.
There had been talk, I think, while we were making the first film, that New World were looking at a sequel, because they gave us more time and more money part of the way through, because they were getting excited about what they were seeing, the dailies that were making their way over to Los Angeles. But you kind of dismiss that talk as fast as you hear it.
When New World talked to us about the sequel, they left it up to us. We went in and said, look, we've got some ideas for the sequel. We'd like to do this, we'd like to do that. And that sort of helped sell it. But there was no, apart from sort of script approval, there was nothing that they were insisting on.